Welcome back in here to Live Now from Fox. As promised before we went to that 2-minute commercial break, said we're going to be diving into some of those headlines in the Middle East. Putting this up on your screen, this is from Fox News saying breaking Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu orders immediate and powerful strikes in the Gaza Strip. And so we do know that the Prime Minister made that announcement today in retaliation for what Israeli officials say was a Hamas attack on Israeli forces in the city of Rafah. Of course, we know this is as the deal to end the war in Gaza is one of President Trump's biggest diplomatic achievements this turn. We do want to now bring into the conversation Ben Cohen with the Foundation of Defense of Democracies. Ben, thanks so much for being with us here on Live Now from Fox. Can you first of all talk about the incident that the Israeli government is now describing as the reasoning behind ordering these new strikes?
Yes, well, that incident took place today in Rafah, right in the south of the Gaza Strip. And a terrorist cell launched an attack there on Israeli troops in the vicinity using small arms fire and an anti-tank missile. And that quickly led to Israel responding and to Prime Minister Netanyahu's statement that you have here on the screen that Israel was going to respond with immediate and powerful strikes in the Gaza Strip. And there have been strikes there this evening in Gaza City, in Deir al-Balah, and in Rafah as well. And I think that what this shows is that not only is Hamas still a force in Gaza, but this idea that's contained within the ceasefire agreement that it's going to surrender its weapons and surrender power looks more and more untenable every time an incident like this happens.
And so there really is a lot to dive into as we're taking a live vantage point there over the Gaza skyline. Quite dark there on the screen, but still wanted to make sure we're showing folks what it looks like now at this hour. And so I want to bring this up, Ben. So we do know that the Israel Defense Forces claim that Hamas militants fired those anti-tank missiles there in sniper fire as well against the IDF forces in Rafah in southern Gaza. But Hamas, though, responded claiming that it had no involvement in the incident and remains committed to the ceasefire. What do you think of this response from them? Is this something that is expected to come from that side?
Yeah, Christina, I think you've answered the question yourself. I mean, I think this is Hamas's modus operandi. This is what they do. And in fact, we've seen a pattern of this since the ceasefire was implemented. We have seen a pattern of this. There was an incident about 9 days ago where 2 IDF soldiers were actually killed by Hamas fire. Hamas denied then, as it denies now, that it was involved in that incident. You've also seen Hamas really cracking down on any opposition, any dissension within the Gaza Strip amongst Palestinians in Gaza. And in fact, some of the most violent scenes that we've witnessed since the ceasefire came into force have been against anti-Hamas Palestinians by Hamas's Arrow unit, which is their internal security unit. So I think that what's happening is that Hamas is trying to slowly unravel this ceasefire, but always maintain some distance from any incident that occurs on the ground to deny that it was involved. And I think that is a trick that the Israelis saw through a long time ago. I think Secretary of State Rubio certainly understands that that's what Hamas does, and he's skeptical. And I think even President Trump understands this and has repeatedly warned Hamas that if they continue to undermine the ceasefire in this way, then he feels he'll have no choice but to agree that the IDF can do what it needs to do.
And so the thing that a lot of folks are still focused on right now at this point are the remains of those 13 remaining hostages. Still heartbreaking to see that they have not been returned back over the border. I have to ask you, Ben, do you think that there will be some sort of change here in the next few days with these new announcements that Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is making that will have some sort of movement on that front?
Well, you see, you've identified here the other violation of the ceasefire, which is that Hamas committed to releasing all the hostages, both those that were alive and those that were murdered or were slain in its custody. And as you say, there are still 13 hostages that still haven't been returned. And Hamas plays, I mean, I think of the statement issued last night by some of the hostage families in Israel about Hamas playing cruel games. And that is exactly what it is doing. The hostages, when they were in Gaza, were a major point of leverage for them. Even with these 13 remaining dead hostages, Hamas is determined to extract as much leverage as it can out of them. And last night we saw what was ostensibly a hostage body being returned. Once the forensic examination took place, those remains were actually identified as belonging to someone, an Israeli that had already been returned following the October 7th massacre in 2023. So this was not an unidentified hostage that they returned. Then we saw more scenes last night. There's a video all over the internet today of Hamas basically staging the discovery of a hostage body. They moved the remains of a hostage into a pit. They then dug up that pit and they brought in representatives of the International Committee of the Red Cross to witness them doing that. So this is deliberate deceit on Hamas's part. I think most Israelis are hoping, praying that they get all these deceased hostages back. But again, going by Hamas's current performance, there's no guarantee that'll happen.
And Ben, there are also several sources out there reporting about the relationship between, of course, U.S. President Trump as well as the Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, saying that Netanyahu has been reaching out, trying to get in touch with President Trump as he's now on this trip to East Asia to resolve some of this. The relationship between the two of them has really been front and center as this ceasefire agreement has initially gone into focus here. What are some of thoughts there as we're looking ahead to see what happens in the hours after since Netanyahu made this statement?
Well, I think Netanyahu wants the backing, the support, the understanding of the United States when Israel decides that it needs to respond to these Hamas provocations militarily. And I think he expects the United States to have Israel's back. Obviously, the US, as the author of this ceasefire plan, has a vested interest in maintaining it. But I think that both Trump and others in the administration have made it pretty clear that with consistent violations of the ceasefire, and particularly kinetic military violations of the ceasefire, Israel has a right of response. I think the deeper concern for Netanyahu is this sort of network of partners that President Trump has assembled to try to implement the ceasefire. I think Israel is particularly worried about the roles here of Qatar and Turkey. Qatar and Turkey obviously are backers of Hamas. They host Hamas, they finance Hamas, they equip Hamas. So whether they can be regarded as sort of neutral parties, neutral mediators, I'm very skeptical of that personally. The other point, of course, is that at a certain point in this ceasefire, an international stabilization force, so-called, would be deployed in Gaza to keep the peace. The Israelis would withdraw, Hamas would disarm, and this stabilization force would take over running Gaza in terms of law and order, in terms of the delivery of humanitarian aid to its population and so on. And I think that force is looking more and more, less and less viable with each Hamas violation of the ceasefire that we see. And I think Israel's concern is that, look, if Qatar and Turkey, who are allies of Hamas, come in ostensibly to enforce the ceasefire, that is going to weaken Israel, and they're understandably concerned that that Hamas will strengthen itself through the back door using its Turkish and Qatari allies.
And still so much unfolding there in the region. Ben Cohen there with the FDD, helping us to break down the very latest. Ben, before I let you go, anything else we should really be looking at as this situation, unfortunately, doesn't have an answer at this point, but something that we're still monitoring very closely?
Yeah, I mean, I think what I would say to viewers is let's hope that this ceasefire lasts. Let's hope that it can be successful. But I think we have to be preparing ourselves for the possibility that the conflict could resume in Gaza. And I think that if that happens, that will entirely be because Hamas has messed with this ceasefire on a small scale, growing bigger each day. And at a certain point, it will no longer be viable to talk about a ceasefire with, you know, a few violations here and there. And it's at that point that we'll return to an active conflict.
And so hopefully that's something that we'll continue to follow here on Live Now from Fox. Certainly appreciate Ben Cohen with the FDD to help us break down the very latest headlines. Thanks so much for
Thanks so much, Christina.